Hello everyone and welcome to the Flow Train. This presentation is going to show you some techniques you can use to help smooth out your writing. Flow is one of the most common things we get asked about in the Multiliteracy Center. We'll sit down with a writer and ask them what they're concerned about, and they'll say something like, "Can you make sure my paper flows?" I think some coaches don't quite know how to answer this question because flow is not a technical term, and yet it is a word consistently used by writers. So for the first part of this presentation, I'm going to talk about how I am interpreting the word flow, and then I'm going to share with you some techniques and tricks you can use to help get the smooth writing that you are looking for. So here I'm going to define flow in this particular case as the readability of text, influenced by the established connections between the writing's ideas. Basically what I mean is that when writers ask about flow, they're asking about the aesthetic presentation of their ideas. So it's important to remember that the techniques I'm going to be sharing are not hard and fast do's and don'ts. Instead, you should try to think of them as artistic techniques you can employ to optimize the way your ideas are read. So how do we get good flow in our writing? There are essentially two separate aspects. One is showing a clear connection between ideas, and the other is using some variety in your vocabulary and sentence structure. In a way, these two are conflicting elements. When writers want to show connections between ideas, typically they want to repeat themselves. However, writing with good flow requires writers to show those connections with minimal repetition. So here, I'm going to generalize that good flow can be achieved through high diversity in vocabulary, sentence length, and sentence structure, organizing ideas so they are near each other, and using transitions. We'll take a closer look at each one of these as we go through the presentation. Let's start off by talking about one way we can show ideas connecting in our writing. Transitions can help pass the baton from one idea to another. Here's one technique you can use with transitions. If you have two paragraphs, try to find an idea that links the topics of both paragraphs together. If these ideas were in conversation with each other, would they be disagreeing or agreeing? If they are agreeing, is the second topic continuing the idea of the first topic, or is it a separate supporting idea? Questioning the relationship and organization of the topics in each paragraph of your paper can help you determine what kind of transition would be appropriate. Sometimes transitions can be accomplished in a single word. Sometimes they can be accomplished by including a sentence that indicates relationship. Another technique for developing transitions is to link all paragraphs back to the paper's thesis. If a paragraph begins by introducing a topic and then provides supporting information, then the writer should probably connect those ideas back to the main point of the paper in order to develop them and show how they connect with other topics in the paper. Here are some single-word transitions that can help connect your ideas in different ways. You can see that each of these words implies a relationship between two ideas. Some of them serve to contrast the previous thought, others extend, compare, or complement it. Here's a little exercise for you. Can you think of a possible transition sentence that can be inserted at the bottom of this first paragraph to help introduce the second paragraph? Here is one possible fix we came up with. Now let's begin talking about how to get more variety into the structure of your writing. Readers pick up on repetitive sentence structure pretty easily, largely I think because there is a rhythmic element to language and people are naturally prone to pattern recognition. Here's an example. I looked about the office. There was a coffee machine. Coffee sounded nice. I searched for creamer. It was on top of the microwave. The sugar was in the top cupboard. I popped open the coffee machine. I reached for the coffee tin. My hand opened the tin. It was empty. Oh, darn. That didn't sound very good, did it? All of the sentences were about the same length and used the same construction, a simple subject-verb-object arrangement. Well, how about this? I looked about the office and saw there was a coffee machine. Coffee sounded nice. I searched for creamer and found it on top of the microwave. I also found sugar, which was in the top cupboard. Popping open the coffee machine, I reached for the coffee tin and opened it. It was empty. Oh, darn. That was better, right? Some sentences were longer than others. At least one sentence didn't start with a subject, and I used different kinds of clauses and phrases to arrange my information differently from sentence to sentence. My second example had more variety in sentence structure. In a nutshell, here is the guiding principle for getting good flow through a variety in sentence structure. 1. Avoid using similar constructions near each other, and 2. Vary the length of your sentences. This seems simple enough, right? It is, but because I happen to know a bit more about this, I'm going to share some technical details that might help you gain a deeper understanding of how this works. I want to show you how ideas can be represented by independent and dependent elements, what I call idea containers. These representations can be joined and arranged in many different ways. We'll begin our exploration of idea containers with a simple refresher on dependent and independent clauses. Being able to detect the difference between elements that are independent and elements that are dependent will help you see parts of a sentence as chunks of information, idea containers that can be attached to or nested inside other idea containers. To begin, I'll remind you that independent clauses can stand alone as ideas, and dependent clauses need to be attached to an independent clause to make sense. If you're unsure if a sentence element is independent or dependent, you can always use what I call the pencil test. Simply use a pen or a pencil to cover up an element you suspect might be dependent. If the rest of the sentence makes sense without it, the element is dependent. Typically, you will see conjunctions with commas, colons, periods, and semicolons attached to independent clauses. Dependent clauses will usually be separated by commas, prepositions, or conjunctions without commas. Go ahead and try the pencil test out on these two examples in the middle of the slide. You can see in the first example that Blizzard went to the store is the independent clause. Bought some milk still conveys an idea, but it needs to be attached to something independent to make sense because it is lacking a subject. In the second example, Blizzard got tired can stand by itself. So can he had homework to do. Wanted to take a nap, however, is a dependent element that needs to be attached to an independent clause to make sense. In this example, it is attached to Blizzard got tired. Try to picture these two sentences as being broken up into chunks where the dependent elements are nested inside independent elements. As you can see in the second example, independent elements can also be attached to each other with conjunctions accompanied by a comma. In addition, you could also use semicolons. Keep this idea of containers, arrangement, and nesting in mind as we look at these next few examples. The grammatical terms I am dropping here are not important for our purposes. I'm sure grammar experts would argue with me about how to break some of these examples into categories or what these categories should even be labeled, but grammar is not truly what interests us here. Just try to notice how English language allows us to take ideas and represent them as different sentence elements. Look at this first sentence. Although I don't know how to dance, I do know how to have a good time. The dependent element here is an adjunct phrase, meaning we can move it around to other places in the sentence without changing a word. That's a handy trick you can use to switch up sentence constructions if you think your writing is getting too repetitive. You can just change the locations of certain dependent elements. Do you see how I can represent the same dependent phrase at the beginning of that first sentence as a participial phrase? I had a good time, comma, knowing I did not know how to dance. This conveys all the same information as the first sentence, but instead of representing the idea of not knowing how to dance as a contrasting element using although, it is represented with an ing verb, the same meaning represented with a different dependent element. We can see the same thing happen when we look at coming in for a landing. The plane touched the runway, under participial phrases. And the plane touched the runway as it came in for a landing, under prepositions. The same information is being represented by two different dependent elements. In this case, we have the participial phrase with the ing verb and the prepositional phrase as it came in for landing. I will take you through the rest of these examples in a little bit more detail too. Looking at this slide, you will notice that the elements being pointed out are underlined and the language components connecting them to the sentence are in yellow. Take a look at parenthetical elements. You can see that the underlined information interrupts the independent clause. It is inserted into the sentence and flanked by commas to set it apart as an interjection. This is really useful for delivering additional information as an aside. Under conjunctions, we can see that coordinating conjunctions like and, if, but, or are really handy at linking ideas. Remember, what is linked can be independent or dependent. In this example, both linked ideas are independent. What conjunction you pick indicates the relationship between the two ideas. Under prepositions, we can see that the yellow prepositions allow us to extend sentences with little compact ideas. My suit came back from the cleaners without my tie. I could even extend this sentence further and include even more information if I wanted to by using adjectives. My favorite blue suit came back from the wretched cleaners last night without my tie. I could even include some other little dependent elements to pack even more information in. My favorite blue suit came back from the wretched cleaners without my tie, probably because I forgot to tip the owner's son, who works as a delivery boy at a pretty good restaurant down the street from my office. Yeah, that was all one sentence. Try experimenting with writing the same ideas in different ways the next time you write. What ideas could you compress into what idea containers? What different arrangements can you compose out of the same information? The more you do this, the more you will discover different varieties of sentence structures. Here's an example of an arrangement experiment. As you can see, independent clauses are in yellow and dependent elements are in green. At the top, we have two complete sentences. The second line combines those sentences into one with a conjunction. The third transforms NMU claims to be the best into something dependent. The next line makes a similar transformation from their sports teams seem to lose a lot to losing a lot. The last line is an example of an adjunct phrase that can be moved to the other side of the sentence if necessary. Here's some practice for you. Try experimenting with how you can rearrange the ideas in these two sentences. A little more practice, try it again with these two. Let's move on to some tips on how to reduce word repetition in your writing. First, work to limit the number of times you repeat the same nouns. Nouns are persons, places, things, or ideas. This mostly applies to sentences that are right next to each other. A lot of the time, if you have one or two sentences as a buffer, you can use that same noun again without sounding repetitive. So, how do you avoid using the same nouns over and over again? Well, there are three ways. You can replace the noun with a pronoun like it, they, him, or her. You can not mention the noun and build from the subject of the previous sentence. Or you can substitute the noun with another word that means relatively the same thing. Take a look at the two paragraphs on this slide. The upper paragraph does not contain any repetition reduction techniques. The lower one has been modified to sound smoother. The yellow type points out the changes we made. You can see that we use the name Blizzard in the first sentence. He replaces the name in the third sentence. In the fourth sentence, Blizzard is replaced with wonderful dog. In the second half of that sentence, we also deleted one use of Blizzard because we already knew who we were talking about. Okay, now I'm going to give you a paragraph. You can try some repetition reduction techniques on yourself. I'll leave it up for a few seconds, but feel free to pause the video for as long as you need to. Just try to rewrite the paragraph so it sounds a little smoother. Are you finished? Here's one possible paragraph I came up with. In Alice Walker's To Hell with Dying, Mr. Sweet was a good companion for the narrator. He always made the narrator feel special, making her want to be around him, overjoyed whenever he would visit her. Despite his alcoholism and bad influence, Mr. Sweet always showed respect, and his virtues far outweighed his faults. His positive impact would follow the children for the rest of their lives. Well, hey, that's the end of this presentation. If you have any questions about how to improve the flow of your writing, or if you'd like someone to help you work through any of your writing projects, please visit our website to schedule an appointment with an MTMC coach, or stop by and see us. We like that too.